Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I am your host, Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, I've got part 2 of the whimsical yet serious God's Handbook for Operating Human Vehicles, a no-nonsense, no-strings-attached approach to universal being, which is both an art book and audiobook of mine. So this is the audiobook version, which includes some fun musical interludes. And I brought you part 1 of this a couple weeks ago, so here is the follow-up and conclusion and continuation of that. But before we get into God's Handbook, got some announcements to make and some people to thank. I've been out of the office for a few weeks, so this is the first podcast episode I have recorded since mid-August. So that means I've got some people to thank. Yay! Would like to thank Brooke and Peter for making contributions in support of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast via PayPal. I mention Brooke's name once every month because Brooke has a regular contribution that's made, and then Peter comes along every once in a while and does a little PayPal donation. Thank you so much for support of the podcast. Really appreciate it, you guys. There's been some action over at my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/MartinWBall, where I have a paid membership everywhere from $1 a month up to $100 a month. And at the $100 level, which is the God Molecule level, that also gets you access to the full back catalog of the Entheogenic Evolution Archive, which has a couple hundred hours worth of recordings that are no longer available publicly. So it's only accessible at my Patreon page, and also special offers and gifts that I give out there, and comes with a 1-hour monthly video call, check-in, integration, however you'd like to formulate that. And got a couple new folks really across the spectrum over there at Patreon. So I want to thank Jean-Daniel and Tomislav, who signed up more at the lower end of the tiers. Then I got 2 new patrons at the God Molecule level of Paul and Ellen. So thank you. Welcome. I appreciate having your support and looking forward to having conversations with you monthly via Zoom in fulfillment of your gifts and bonuses that you receive at Patreon at that level. As I have been mentioning over recent months and weeks and all of that, my next offering of my 5-MeO DMT Integration Specialist training course with Mindscape Institute is starting in just a week and a half from the release of this podcast episode. This is a 9-week course that I've designed based on not only my many of years of work and experience with 5-MeO DMT, but also as a integration coach and guide, and working with clients on a daily basis from around the world who are seeking help to integrate and receive aftercare with their work with 5-MeO DMT. This course is designed to help educate and prepare others for working in this field. I still have a few spots left in the class, so if you're interested, now is the time to act. Class starts on Wednesday, September 17th. It is a 9-week course that runs through November 12th. I also have 2 scholarship positions still available for the class. One has already been awarded. The scholarship provides $750 off of the total cost of the class, which is $2,500. And if you would like to be considered for one of these scholarship positions, what I'm asking for is to write me an essay about your interest, your experience, and also your financial need, and why you feel you would like to receive this special discount in order to take this class. I've got quite a bit of interest around that, but it does require writing an essay for me and some follow-up from you if you are interested. But the time is now if you want to act. And if you want any more information about the class, just email me at martinwball@gmail.com. You can also find info about the class at my personal website, martinball.net, or at my integration site, nondualentheogenicintegration.com. And of course, I am always available for 30, 60, or 90-minute video calls to help you integrate your experience or even prepare for your experience. And I do specialize in 5-MeO DMT, but I'm not limited to that particular psychedelic molecule, and I'm happy to talk to you about any experiences that you may be having with any psychedelic medicines. And also, sometimes people reach out, they don't have a psychedelic experience that they're looking to integrate, but maybe they have more of a non-dual experience that happened in another context or arose spontaneously and would like someone to talk to about that. And I'm happy to provide that service for you as well. Just reach out. We will make it happen, and I'll get you on the schedule. All right, that's what I have in terms of thank yous and general announcements. Again, we have part 2 of God's Handbook for Operating Human Vehicles. I'm going to be leaving these podcast episodes up just because they're fun and I like having them out there. But after that, I will be switching over to book 3 of Tales of Arduin. We're going to be listening to The Alchemist and the Eagle here on the Entheogenic Evolution in between interview episodes. So they'll come out once every 2 weeks. And as I do with my other audiobooks that I share on the podcast, those episodes will only be available for 2 weeks at a time, and then I'll be removing whatever previous release there was when I upload the new one. So you do want to stay on top of the podcast episodes, but of course, if you miss any of them, the full audiobooks are available over at Audible, Amazon, the Apple Bookstore, along with my many other audiobooks, and of course, all my books are also available in print and ebook format. So that's what we got for today. Let's go ahead and jump into part 2 of God's Handbook for Operating Human Vehicles. Hope you're enjoying this and hope you're getting something out of it as well. Be back next week with a brand new interview for you here on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. The ego. The ego is not so much a thing as it is a function. The function of the ego is to create a false sense of self and identity. And through this function, the human vehicle is able to have a concept and awareness of itself that is not possible for other living vehicles. It is, in other words, an intimate aspect of the human experience of consciousness and being, and it is both necessary and persistent. Despite religious and spiritual claims to the contrary, all projections of the ego, it is impossible to kill your ego or live an egoless life. However, it is possible to free yourself from the grip of the ego, at which point the ego is something that you live with and not something that you mistake for yourself. To see how this works, let's get a better idea of how the ego functions and what tools and methods it has at its disposal. The simplest way of describing the ego is to say that it is a collection of limited energetic patterns that collectively comprises an individual's sense of self. These patterns of energy include patterns of thought and conceptualization, patterns of self-expression, behaviors and uses of the body, including gestures, body posture, tone of voice, movement, speech, beliefs, projections, and attachments. There is no core to the collection, no self-existent entity holding it all together. There is no soul, spirit, or true self lurking beneath the collections of energetic patterns. Only the patterns themselves. This is also why an ego takes time to develop in the human vehicle. As human vehicles mature, their sense of self becomes more and more defined and individualistic, generally culminating in early adulthood into a fairly solid, albeit illusory, sense of self. Because the constructed sense of self is illusory, however, it requires constant effort to maintain, and individuals will experience constant challenges to their sense of self. How individuals react to such challenges reveals how either relaxed or energetically wound up their egos are. The ego is tasked with the job of maintaining a sense of self within a constant flux of energy and experience, both internally and externally. As the individual develops and is exposed to a greater variety of energies and experiences, the ego collects energetic patterns that help it make sense of itself and all that it encounters. In a sense, it develops a toolkit of actions and reactions from which it chooses on a continual basis, always with the goal of maintaining the sense of self. All patterns of the ego are developed through the free will of the individual, and therefore the individual is ultimately responsible for his or her ego patterns and tendencies. A bulk of such patterns are freely adopted as young children, however, so most individuals are not aware that they are actively choosing the structures of their egos for themselves. Most children are simply mimicking what they observe around them, and as conscious beings that want to fit in, be loved, and find a place in their culture and society, most adopt the patterns of their culture and family without any thought. Culture, through enculturated individuals, tends to present itself as a given or simply how things are. Mistaking this for reality, children simply copy that which takes place around them. As individuals mature, the ego asserts itself even more through the period that is identified as adolescence. It is at this time that individuals begin to truly question their identity and may or may not choose to react to the ego structures around them that they have seemingly unconsciously adopted. At this point, the ego can become rebellious, reactionary, or complacent. Usually, there's a mix, and challenges and turmoil are likely to result with the eventual emergence of an adult-centered ego structure. Whether the individual is aware of this fact or not, the truth is that all such ego structures and patterns are freely adopted by the individual. In other words, the ego is comprised of collections of choices that have been made by the individual. While the past can never be changed, this does mean that individuals can make new or different choices in the present, however. And as such, the ego is always open to change and reconfiguration. In fact, entire ego settings can be deconstructed and replaced with brand new ego structures. This is what tends to happen when individuals join a religion, convert, begin a spiritual path, or even join a club, team, or military organization. The ego is constantly under negotiation and is subject to continual reconditioning. Well-established ego patterns can be very difficult to break, however, and for the most part, the ego, rather than embracing no patterning or no conditioning, will generally choose to supplant one set of patterns with another. This is the great irony of spiritual and religious traditions that supposedly promote selfless action or transcendence of the ego. These are great selling points to ambitious egos, but they're also disingenuous. All that occurs is one set of ego structures gets replaced with another that is supposedly more spiritual and virtuous. Just more of the ego diluting the ego. Ego versus natural energy. As has already been discussed, the human vehicle functions according to the energy centers present in the body. These energy centers and processors work just fine in the absence of an ego, as is made clear by animals and non-human vehicles. The energetic constructs of the ego are therefore something extra found in human vehicles. As stated, the purpose of the ego is to generate a false sense of self and identity, and this is primarily what sets human vehicles apart from other beings. Because the ego is an energetic process, it tends to interfere with the natural flow of energy in the human vehicle. As a result, individuals can become cut off from the full experience of their various energy centers and can find their energetic process is far from ideal. Let's consider a few ways that the ego does this. Commitment to illusion. The most basic way that the ego disturbs the natural production and flow of energy in the human vehicle is through the ego's commitment to illusion, projection, and ideas and ideals that are not necessitated by energetic realities. Of course, the most basic illusion is that of a separate, self-existent self, which does not exist. Basically, all the other commitments to illusions that the ego makes are predicated on this initial illusion. This fact is why having a unitary, non-dual, or mystical experience can be so liberating for individuals. In the non-dual experience, the individual is energetically open to the fullness of their true nature, infinite, without boundaries or limitations, and all things are included in the identity of the self. In spiritual language, this is described as union with God, the ultimate, the absolute, the pure nature of the mind, infinite being, etc., etc. Energetically, it means that the limited energetic constructs of the ego have been temporarily transcended, and the individual is able to experience him or herself in infinite form. However, full mystical experience, or what is more descriptively identified as full energetic opening, is rare for most individuals and tricky to achieve. Paradoxically, such an experience cannot be created, generated, or produced by the ego. In other words, there is no method or path to such an experience, as the ego cannot transcend itself with any of its patterns of action. The only way for an individual to have a full energetic opening is to allow the ego structures to temporarily fall away, which can be experienced as a kind of death. As long as the ego is trying to make such an experience happen, it won't. When the ego finally relaxes and effectively gives up, then the individual is able to expand energetically into awareness of the full nature of being. Such an experience can be liberating, profoundly transformative, and life-altering. It does not, however, render the individual enlightened in any way, for once the ego takes hold of the individual once again, old energetic patterns will immediately reassert themselves, unless the individual consciously chooses otherwise, a possibility that only arises in conjunction with a deep level of self-awareness. Let's look at an example. Imagine a person who has spent her entire adult life seeking a mystical experience. She practices yoga, meditates, prays, makes offerings, strives for moral and ethical uprightness, and all the things she thinks will bring her closer to God or the Absolute. One day, out of the blue, she suddenly has a full mystical experience, and all these strivings of the ego drop away, and she experiences the infinite fullness of herself. The experience is temporary, however, and once the ego is back, she falls right back into her old patterns, beliefs, and behaviors. In fact, she now goes around telling everyone that the path she followed is genuine and authentic because she had a mystical experience. She now knows that her path is true because she got the results she wanted. Thus, more ego projection and illusion ensues. The only effective method to maintaining non-dual awareness and being is through commitment to truth. The creations and energetic constructs of the ego are not truth. Consider another example. We've already discussed how sexual energy is a primary component of the human vehicle. Humans are sexual. There is an energetic drive that is simply there. Egos adopt all kinds of invented attitudes towards sex and sexual energy, however, and in doing so, prevent the authentic expression and enjoyment of sexual energy. Ego-based approaches to sex and sexuality are filled with the ideas of proper and improper, right and wrong, sacred and profane, allowed and disavowed, etc. These are all ways in which the ego attempts to control and define sexual energy. Egos invent ideas that chastity is good, virginity is sacred, that sex is a desire that needs to be overcome or transcended, etc. These are all just ideas that egos adopt and then use to try and structure their experience. The more the ego gets involved, the less natural expression of energy there is. This creates blocks in one's energy that then requires the energy be released or expended in other ways. Catholic priests are an excellent case in point. As a rule of thumb, you can always ask yourself, am I choosing to act based on what I feel or what I think or believe I should do? Priests, for example, aren't celibate because they don't feel any sexual urges. They are celibate because they believe that it is a sign of holiness and commitment to God. This is a commitment to illusion, however, and as such is bound to create imbalances in their energy, usually with undesired results. All natural energy needs an outlet and needs to be expressed and grounded. Energy that is not released according to its nature will find other methods to express and ground. And given that it naturally wants to flow in the manner that is most appropriate for it, it takes tremendous and continual effort of the ego to redirect and restructure the energy. As a metaphor, we can imagine that the natural rivers, springs, and waterways of the human vehicle have been dammed, drained, redirected, and filtered. It takes energy to maintain such internal structures and also takes ongoing commitment to illusion. The natural person acts on what they truly feel, not on what they think they should or should not do. They have sex, eat food, dance and sing, and act as feels genuine and in accordance with reality. They don't live according to preset ideals, ideas, dogmas, or concern for purity, righteousness, or spiritual or religious values. Energetic blocks. All egos create energetic blocks in the body. Since egos are engaged in the constant process of defining self versus other, they are always in the business of creating limitations, boundaries, and as a result, identities. Constructed identities always get in the way of genuine expression and experience of energy. This is why there is no artificial identity present in the full mystical experience, for if there were, there would be an energetic barrier between the experiencing self and that which is experienced. When the ego is not operating, the blocks and restrictions are relaxed and individuals expand into their full, infinite nature. When the ego is operating, blocks, resistance, and withholdings of energy are always present. The ego can create energetic blocks anywhere along the central column of energy, from genitals to the top of the head. In a freely flowing energetic system, all the energy centers of the body work in concert together to move, process, and express energy. The ego can, and usually does, interfere in this process of being. An ego that is afraid of expressing itself can get caught in the throat with related constrictions in the gut. An ego that over-intellectualizes can get caught in the head and cut the individual off from the feeling and sexual centers. An ego that is afraid of getting hurt emotionally cuts off access to the heart. An ego that looks down on sex can cut the individual off from the sexual center. The list goes on and on. While there are many variations on blocks in energy and the resultant experiences that generate from them, the cause is generally the same: an interfering ego that is imposing its beliefs, ideas, and shoulds on the natural energy system that is the human vehicle. Ego-generated energy blocks are also usually associated with correlating projections. In other words, not only does the ego affect how energy is processed in the body, but also affects how energy is processed between bodies. A very simple way of putting this is to say that people will generally have to encounter and face their worst fears in actual situations, and even if the situation does not realistically enact a worst fear, the individual's ego will probably project onto the situation in such a way that the ego will perceive the enactment of its fear. It is important to recall that the human vehicle emits electromagnetic energy, and the strongest field is generated by the heart. The heart, as a sense organ, is looking for that which will complement its energy the best. Thus, in a sense, egos can draw experiences to themselves, and especially other egos that are broadcasting a matching, complementary, or resonant frequency. For example, an ego that gets upset with other people talking in a movie theater is likely to encounter just such an event. The ego, as an actor, is looking for other characters to fulfill necessary roles in its self-created narrative drama about itself. In the dream or visionary state, the ego merely projects other characters onto the mental screen of the dreaming mind and interacts with others to play out its fears, dramas, and curiosities. In real life, the ego enlists other egos to play the necessary parts to act out its drama. Egos are always looking for other egos to play along, and most egos play along quite willingly. This is what we call culture, religion, and group identity. It's all a game of charades and make-believe. An ego-generated energy block cannot be removed or released without a correlating expression and processing of energy. All energy needs to process, and there are no ways around this basic fact. In practical terms, what this means is that when ego blocks release, the individual will have to go through a period of transition and processing of energy where the normal and usual structures of the ego cannot effectively hold. This can be confusing, distressing, and disorienting for the individual. It can also be blissful, liberating, and ecstatic. It all depends on the nature of the block, the method of release, and the individual's attitude toward what is occurring. Energetic releasing and processing can take the form of purging, vomiting, diarrhea, speaking nonsense, speaking in tongues, vibrations and spasms in the body, feeling loss of control of consciousness, rational thought, ecstatic laughter or crying, excretion of sexual fluids, mucus, coughing, gagging or choking, heart palpitations, sweating, rapid temperature fluctuations, feelings of possession, mystical union, full body orgasms, and the list goes on. When releasing is occurring, keeping the body in a symmetrical posture tends to deepen the release and help in the processing. At an exterior level, when individuals release ego-generated energy blocks, it usually means that there will be a corresponding shift in external relationships to correlate with the new energetic signature of the individual. These shifts can also require processing of energy and will often translate into breaking of old relationships and the formation of new relationships. For example, if an individual has not been expressing him or herself in a relationship, but is able to release that internal block, then that individual will be more likely to express openly in the relationship. This could lead to the dissolution of the relationship or a strengthening of it depending on the state of the ego of the other person involved in the relationship. Reality check. The temptation for the ego is to fall back into previously established patterns and relationships, both internally and externally. Unless one is committed to truth and reality, then the challenge of the transitional period while energy is processing and reconfiguring can inspire one to fall back into old patterns for the sake of perceived comfort and ease, or quickly adopt a new set and find a place for the self. This is especially so if the ego patterns are correlated with close interpersonal relationships. There are very strong ego-generated pressures to avoid discomfort and social distress. Egos generally don't like to make others uncomfortable, unless, of course, that's their thing. Once an ego block is removed, old relationships won't seem to work in the same way anymore. and this can be uncomfortable and distressing. Loved ones claim, "I don't know who you are anymore," and "you're not the person I fell in love with," etc. Other egos cry out for you to come back into the fold and be the person they think you should be. This is also why, when an individual breaks out of one set of ego structures, it is common to simply and quickly replace them with another set. It is more swapping of identities than it is a release from false identity. This is why converting or starting a spiritual path can feel so liberating, but is not more realistically liberated than that which it is replacing. The individual escapes one confining set of ego patterns and finds another that is more properly suited to its new interests and concerns. Egos are always looking for a group to fit into and therefore are always seeking some identity. Given that all of reality is merely a hall of mirrors, egos tend to want to like what they see in the mirror and therefore routinely seek out reaffirming reflections. Musical interlude number 3. Syrup of Wahoo. Navigating Human Cultures. Pretty much by default, if you find yourself in a human vehicle, you'll also find yourself situated within a human culture. Unless, of course, you've been raised by wolves on a desert island far outside of the normal shipping lanes. Other than the truly alone loner, all humans congregate into cultures, subcultures, countercultures, and other various sets of identities. This is because human cultures are ego-generated identities writ large. As such, there is no such thing as a true culture, because all cultures are fabrications of the ego. They all have arbitrary ideas about what it means to be a human being, the human's place in the world, and how the human being should think, act, and behave. All cultures are relative, and none are more inherently true or authentic than another. Some are more open and permissive than others, and seem to afford more freedom of expression and being, and others are more repressive and controlling, but they are all equally products of the ego. Because cultures are ego creations, they must deal with the reality of ego-generated illusions, blocks, and distortions of energy. Most cultures have found ways to deal with the energetic disturbances caused by the ego in ways that tend to support the overall structures of the culture, and therefore work to reaffirm the constructed identities and realities of the culture and the egos within it. Festivals, wild religious rituals, times of social inversion and protest, etc., all work to release pent-up energy that the ego has blocked from naturally expressing itself. But ironically, these times of expression and release are carefully constructed and set aside as sacred time, which contrasts distinctly with normal time. During such events, individuals often feel free to really let it all hang out, still within structures that the culture deems acceptable, however, and thereby release some of their pent-up energy. Not surprisingly, many such events, festivals, and rituals involve the consumption of alcohol, the great ego drug. Alcohol can help release pent-up energies while simultaneously enforcing and bolstering the most ardent ego-based energy patterns and projections. It is no wonder that alcohol has been such a central feature of human social interaction and recreation. It effectively helps maintain the status quo. Culturally approved release valves usually aren't enough for a culture, however, especially since most participants will immediately take on prior ego structures once the festival, ritual, or event has ended, as it's time to go back to the real world, where normal ego-based activities and identities rule the day. As such, there is generally still a lot of energy that has not been fully released, and the blocks tend to reform almost immediately after the temporary suspension. The way that most cultures seek to deal with this ongoing problem is to then project images of undesired energy outside of itself and project it into a foreign identity. This is why cultures and social groups are always happy to fight and kill each other, and is the dark side of social and cultural identity. This is a problem for virtually all cultures and identities. The dark side of cultural identities tends to come out strongest during times of stress, which is also true for individuals in that their most troubling ego-based illusions tend to come to the surface when the individual feels threatened or challenged in some way. When this happens on a large scale, cultures tend to go to war or find a social identity to scapegoat or blame for their ills. This is ego projecting on a mass scale and is responsible for the most savage acts of violence. Egos are extremely quick to resort to violence to protect their invented identities. Such violence and threats of violence also take place within a culture, molding egos into well-behaved members of the group. For example, many cultures and religions promote violence against those who would reject the group view and ego fantasies. Countless religions have turned against apostate members, heretics, and blasphemers with inquisitions, purgings, and purifications. Similarly, many cultures and traditions have secret initiation rites where the fabricated nature of cultural reality is revealed to initiates, coupled with threats of violence should the initiates reveal this secret to non-initiates. For example, in traditional Southwest Native American cultures, children are taught that the masked kachina dancers are the gods, and they grow up believing this to be true. However, upon initiation, initiates have the truth revealed to them in dramatic ritual form. The kachina dancers are just their older relatives and aren't gods at all. But for culture to work, the illusion must be reinforced, and the initiates are recruited through threat of violence and death to perpetuate the deception on the young generation and properly play their fabricated roles within society. This is just one example, but similar, if not largely identical, cultural practices can be found around the world. Virtually all religion works on the same principles, threatening violence and suffering for those who refuse to play along with the fabricated reality. The truth is that most egos find it easier and socially more comfortable and rewarding to simply play along than to outright challenge or reject the ego-based illusions and fantasies of their culture. As mentioned above, for those who become dissatisfied with their culture and its illusions, adopting a new identity in a new culture is more the norm than liberating from all ego-generated illusions. Therefore, egos tend to swap illusions rather than do the challenging work of dispelling them. As social animals, humans want to interact with other humans, and from the ego's perspective, that means playing along, at least to some degree. The meaning of life. This is generally a hard one for egos to accept, but the meaning of life is simply to live. It couldn't be simpler. Egos, as generators of meaning, want everything to mean something, and often aren't satisfied with just taking things as they are. Egos want to define themselves through a sense of meaning, of purpose, of having something grand and significant to strive toward. And above all, egos want to know that they are doing it right. This is why egos invented things like religion and spirituality, to satisfy the ego's need to have meaning, purpose, and a sense of doing things right. Ironically, not a single human religion or spiritual tradition ever came up with the right answer, however, so they are all equally misleading and misdirecting. Imagine a religion that proclaims, "Relax and just be yourself." Wouldn't that be something? Of course, that's not at all what they say. In fact, they say just about everything but that. More often than not, they use fear to hook egos into their belief and practice programs, and countless egos are more than happy to buy in. After all, egos created religions for themselves, so naturally they are attracted to the product. They're all just ego games, however, and as such are completely unnecessary and are thoroughly imaginary and fantasy-based. As an embodiment of God in a human vehicle, you are perfectly free to ignore all the nonsense. And there is no requirement that you participate, though your ego might have other ideas for you. In the end, it's up to you. It might help to consider that the laws of God, or the way of the universe, cannot be violated by you or anyone else. In other words, you do not have a choice in this matter, and your will cannot produce a fall from grace, damnation, or anything else. The only laws that exist are the ones we call the laws of physics, biology, chemistry, etc. No matter what you do, you cannot violate these laws, for this is how reality works. Without these structures and limitations, there would be no reality here to enjoy at all. These laws make it possible for you to be here, in reality, in a body, with a life. Problems arise when egos seek after meaning beyond these facts. You exist. Do what you want with the time you have. Enjoy yourself. There is no greater meaning or purpose. Always remember Despite all the apparent diversity in reality, there is really only one actor, you, God, and billions of different characters, all playing different roles. Does the actor really care what one character does to another? Does the actor really care if the characters suffer, kill, maim, die, or whatever? Does the actor care if any of the characters are saved or enlightened or doing the will of God or anything else? No, of course not. It's all a charade, so what does it matter? Though countless egos struggle against this reality and seem to do everything they can to deny it and create a false sense of purpose and meaning for themselves, this truth can also be profoundly liberating when taken to heart. It means that within the given structures of reality, you are free to do what you want. You are free to be yourself if you allow yourself to do so. You are also free to be a confused ego, completely invested in ego games and illusions. It's all your choice. If you want to make up a purpose for yourself, go for it. Just don't expect reality to support you on that fool's errand. It's your game, after all, and you are responsible for it. Most likely, you'll find other egos to play along. But even getting billions of other egos to play along won't affect the actual nature of reality in any way. It doesn't matter how many people accept Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, for example. It's still just a fantasy and doesn't have anything to do with reality. A life dedicated to Jesus is a life dedicated to an illusion and fantasy. If that makes you happy, then so be it. Just don't expect to get anything special for it. As an embodiment of God in a human vehicle, you have a wide variety of options to choose from. You have an infinite intellect, an inexhaustible imagination, and the tools necessary to communicate, create, discover, and express. You have the luxury of enjoying and utilizing the most finely tuned God vehicle available within reality, and it is completely up to you how you choose to use that vehicle in the limited time that you have. You and you alone are responsible for yourself. No one and nothing else is responsible for you and your choices, and this applies to all equally. Realistically, each individual is responsible for him or herself, and no one and nothing else. Most egos react to the above reality by claiming that it's selfish and narcissistic. Egos want to be responsible for all kinds of things, always making everything else their business. They can be pretty pesky that way, and it takes a strong commitment to truth to keep them in check. Ironically, it is through confused arrogance that egos think that they're responsible for everything. Think about nature, for example. In the absence of humans, everything in nature appears to work just fine. Nature doesn't need humans to function. In fact, nature worked great for billions of years before humans came along, and it will work just fine without humans in the future as well. Every last little bit of reality is fully God, and as such, each bit does its part to be itself fully and completely according to the energetic reality of its relationships to everything else within the system. Only human egos could ever think that there's something that must be done to help reality along. Everything else just is, and as such, is fully itself in every moment. Only human egos get confused about this being yourself process, given that egos are predicated on an illusory sense of self, so it's easy to see how they can get confused about what this means. Being responsible for yourself, your energy, and your choices in the time you have in your human vehicle is more than enough responsibility for a human being. Life is a constant and ongoing barrage of choices, options, actions, results, and consequences. If humans were truly responsible for anything else in the universe, this place would be a profound mess. Humans aren't even responsible for most of the functioning of their own bodies, let alone anything that takes place outside of the body. Just imagine if you were responsible for growing your toenails, secreting bile, or converting air in the lungs to oxygen in the blood. Fortunately, your toenails, bile, and lungs work just fine on their own. Most of the processes of your vehicle are running on automatic pilot, thereby freeing you up to do what you want with your self-regulating vehicle. Really, you couldn't have created a more ideal situation for yourself. You've managed to evolve the most sophisticated reality vehicle possible and also freed up yourself to really enjoy it and make the most of it. Why is any greater meaning or purpose or responsibility necessary? Isn't a life of freedom and personal choice enough? Egos are so hard to satisfy. The great irony of being human is that human egos actually create the vast majority of problems that human beings encounter. Reality is a dynamic and exciting place. All kinds of stuff happens. And from the human perspective, some of it seems good, some of it seems bad. Things like asteroid impacts, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, plagues, disease, etc. are all necessary parts of reality and are just functioning according to the laws of reality. Gotta take the good with the bad, you know. Dealing with the facts of reality is enough for any human. It's not easy being here, but the delights, joys, and pleasures make it all worthwhile. Egos, however, do a good job of making things much harder. Egos invent things like genocide, slavery, prisons, hate, racism, ethnocentrism, sexism, and, well, all the other isms you can think of. All ego games come with consequences, and often the consequences are objectively not too good for humans, especially if you find yourself on the wrong side of the projection game. Honestly, the world would be a much more pleasant and enjoyable place for human beings if egos would simply lighten up and relax. If egos would just let go of all of their illusions and fantasies, things would function a great deal more smoothly, and people would be happier in general, and there'd be a lot less unnecessary suffering. It's that freedom and free will thing, however. Human vehicles will always be free to choose whatever they want, and egos can continue to choose fantasy over reality indefinitely. The only thing that anyone can do about this is to take responsibility for him or herself. Only you can liberate yourself from your illusion patterns. You cannot do it for anyone else, and no one else can do it for you. Each version of the self is fully responsible for itself from its perspective. This is just as true for an electron as it is for you and your human vehicle. Death. No guide to operating a human vehicle would be complete without addressing the subject of death. This is probably the number one motivating factor in the ego's quest to make up all kinds of BS about its purpose and the meaning of it all: fear of death. So let's just get right to it. Death is effectively the end for your individual perspective as you experience it from your human vehicle. Is death the end of you? Of course not. Remember, there's only one being, and that one being is everyone and everything. Just because the individual perspective you happen to be enjoying from your vehicle has come to an end doesn't mean that reality just vanishes. Only from your individual perspective. That's a pretty neat trick, actually. You are an infinite, immortal energy being that paradoxically gets to experience itself as living one unique life from the perspective of the one unique reality vehicle. What an amazing trick! Keep in mind that this is exactly how you want things to be. To understand this point, a comparison with movies might be helpful. When you watch a movie, the more you can suspend disbelief, the more enjoyable the movie becomes. In other words, we want to be convinced of the reality of the story in the film, as this affords us more empathetic enjoyment of the story. It doesn't matter if it is a love story or a science fiction or fantasy film. When we watch a movie, we want a good plot, good acting, and a consistent and coherent storyline. If we catch the actors attempting to act, it ruins the enjoyment. If there are too many unbelievable plot holes or inconsistencies, we become critical of the movie. Ideally, we want to be fooled, and we want the fooling to be as complete and realistic as possible, as this maximizes our enjoyment. Well, living a life in a human vehicle is pretty much the same deal. We want to suspend disbelief so that we can really invest ourselves in the experience of being. Deep down, you know that you are God, that you are the only being that exists, and that all of this is simply some fantastic play of forms where nothing really matters. Well, from the eternal perspective, that's pretty boring. All you, all the time, and nothing ever really changes. Infinitely lonely, infinitely boring. So you've invested yourself in the reality project and willingly suspended disbelief in order to really maximize your enjoyment of the show, no matter what the show brings. Horror, comedy, tragedy, ecstasy. It's all a show, and you love it all. So, to make it all seem like it really matters, you've invested yourself in individual lives with individual perspectives, and by all appearances, you only have a limited amount of time to interact with others and enjoy their company. By creating limitations, you've set up the conditions necessary for you to really invest yourself in what you experience. This is what makes reality real. Without these limitations, reality would be no different from imagination. And as we all know, the real thing is better than imagination. Would you rather have real sex or imaginary sex? Would you rather have a real lover or an imaginary one? Which is more satisfying? Which provides a greater sense of meaning and enjoyment in your life? The reality of death is the ultimate meaning generator for the human vehicle. It is what makes everything meaningful and worthwhile. Without death, life would be empty. In other words, act now. Love and enjoy your life now. You won't get another chance from the perspective that you are currently enjoying. Life is a one-shot deal. It's up to you to make the most of it. Express yourself. Create. Love. Enjoy. Smile. Dance. Do what you want. and take full responsibility for yourself. Be all that you can be in every moment, for the moment is truly all that you have. Always remember that you are already liberated simply by your true nature. Everything else is up to you. Final reality check. At this point, you might be wondering, what about my ego? What are my blocks, my illusions, my projections? Self-observation is the only method for gaining personal clarity and centeredness in your energy. Through carefully observing yourself and paying attention to your energy, you can come to know where and when you are pulling yourself out of clarity and into illusion, and when you are or are not in your energetic center. Energetically, being in your center is like being in the center of a maelstrom of energy. But despite the turbulence, your center stays calm, relaxed, and open, much like the eye of a hurricane. When you are energetically displaced by your ego, you feel swept up by the energy and tossed around. It is useful to remember that one's energy is always reflected in the body. Once you get familiar with yourself and the ways that your ego patterns affect you and your expression and mobilization of energy in your being, you'll find that reading the energy of the ego is like reading an open book. Most people are glaringly obvious with how their ego patterns push them around, constrict them, agitate them, and otherwise keep them from being in their energetic centers and maintaining clarity. By reading energy, fluffy metaphysical ideas like auras and chakras are not implied. How energy is mobilized and expressed is very straightforward and open to ordinary observation and perception. No magical powers needed. Let's start with an easy example and make it very relevant. How have you reacted to listening to this handbook? This is a good place to start. Has anything you heard made you angry, uncomfortable, nervous, or anxious? Did anything make you think, but what about X, Y, or Z? Did anything make you cringe? Did anything inspire you to judge the author of this text? These are all possible ego-based reactions to the truth presented in these pages. When confronted with the genuine truth about the nature of being and the nature of reality, most egos find that the information presented conflicts with, dismisses, or discounts many previously held beliefs and ideas. Generally, it is when an ego is challenged and does not have its illusions and projections reaffirmed that it tends to show its true colors and very quickly mobilizes and expresses energy according to its preset patterns. So, consider again, how did you react to what is presented here? What were the feelings you experienced, and how did your body react? Did you find yourself squirming in your seat? Did you feel the need to say your disagreements out loud? Did anything make you tense? And what does that look like in your body? Or conversely, did you feel yourself relaxing as you listened to this book? Did you feel your heart open and notice a correlating relaxed and open posture in your body? Or did it make you feel defensive with tension and a correlating protective body posture? A method for getting to know your energy patterns is to intentionally put yourself in situations that make you uncomfortable and observe your urges to react, control, and manipulate yourself and others. Egos are pretty crafty little buggers, and they learn very quickly how to play it cool and keep their hang-ups and projections hidden. So find situations that help you expose your hidden ego patterns. Dig deep beneath the veneer of the illusory self to see what's really going on in there. Are you able to maintain relaxed, open, loving trust at all times and in all situations? If not, explore yourself to find where you are closing yourself off and holding yourself back. Do you feel confident to fully express your true thoughts and feelings in all situations, no matter what, regardless of how others might take your expressions? If not, look into it. What are you afraid of? A very simple rule of thumb to keep in mind is that genuine energy tends to express itself in the body symmetrically, mirroring the physical shape of the body, whereas ego-based energy patterns tend to give rise to asymmetrical body movement and expression. Again, observe yourself. When you are uncomfortable or uncertain, do you tend to turn away from what is making you uncomfortable? Do you look the discomfort head-on, directly in the eye, or do you glance down or to the side? Do your hands and arms remain relaxed and open, or do they get tense, fidgety, and grasping? Only careful self-observation and exploration can reveal these patterns, bringing them to conscious awareness, thereby allowing you to make new choices and let go of old patterns. How about your relationships with others? Do you tend to get defensive? Are you angry or judgmental? Do you see yourself as a victim of circumstances or the manipulations of others? Or are you able to take what comes, accept it for what it is, and not take things personally? Does your happiness depend on the actions of others, or is it something you've found within? Do you need to be reaffirmed by others, or are you content with your own internal state, regardless? Do you play favorites with people, objects, and experiences, or do you embrace everything equally? Do you attempt to stack the deck in favor of a personally desired outcome, or are you willing to simply be truthful and open and let the chips fall where they may? In the end, it comes down to this: know thyself. If you don't know yourself, your nature as a constantly shifting, loving, and open energy being, then you will be trapped in the false constructs generated by the actions of your ego. Only you can become aware of yourself, your choices, and how you are responsible for your expressions and mobilization of energy. No one else can do that for you. Only you are responsible for being yourself. Ultimately, the self is an ongoing expression and process of energetic exchange and transformation. You are energy as experienced in a human vehicle. Energy is reality. There is no specific self with a name, identity, and purpose hiding underneath the ego. Just the continual process of energy unfolding, expressing, and transforming in the moment of right now. Neither the past nor the future exists. There is only this moment, right here, right now. You are a perspective within this constant flux and change. When you are in your energetic center and clear, the energy swirls through you and around you, but never displaces you from your center, for you are clear. When you're operating from your ego, it's a wild roller coaster ride with lots of ups and downs, twists and turns, and occasional jolts and thrills. It's up to you to decide what you want for yourself in the time that you have. One final thing to keep in mind is that being God in a human vehicle is a perfectly ordinary fact of existence. There's nothing special about it. It's just the way things are. It doesn't come with any miracle-working abilities or magical psychic powers, everlasting life, or anything of the kind. It's just the nature of being human. Nothing more, nothing less. All the ordinary things that the human vehicle can do are absolutely astounding. Living in reality means accepting and acknowledging this fact and letting go of all the mythical ideas of what it truly being God might be. You are a vast, creative, and loving energetic intelligence that is experiencing itself from the perspective of a human vehicle. The experience comes with all the abilities and limitations of the human form. The imagination is infinite, but it is the limitations of reality that make reality real. The possibilities for human expression and experience are fairly infinite, but they are still bound by the limitations of reality. Living in reality means working realistically with what is provided. Musical interlude number 4. Oh, yeah.